Welcome everyone to the Resilient Minds podcast. I'm super grateful and excited to really welcome Susan Winchester onto the show today. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. I really want to, first and foremost, give everyone the understanding of the magic that you've created over time. Susan has helped, lead Fortune 500 companies over 36 years of experience in corporate HR, executive work. She's worked as a renowned keynote speaker, trusted advisor to global organizations, really guiding thousands of different professionals to align with their personal growth and professional goals, really creating these harmonious, integrated, successful workplaces. And this is something that's so imperative, especially nowadays. So I'm very excited to learn and listen and discover deeper, the magic that you're bringing to the world over all this time, these decades, and ignite, this wisdom in others because it's such an important integration. So I guess before we get into it, I'd love to get curious as to, I always talk about on the Resilient Minds our X factor, our experience is what cultivates our why, our big purpose, our mission in life. And I'm
hmm
curious if what's been that resounding experience or X factor that really ignited you to really cultivate that why, that big meaning to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Eric. I love it. So I would have to say it was a very distinct moment in my past. Years and years ago, I had a wonderful boss, a head of HR at one of the companies I worked for, and I only had the opportunity to work for him for 6 months because he was re-diagnosed with melanoma and he passed away. But he was this humble servant, and he was a rather small man, but he just took on all the bullies in the company and really prioritized the key issues that we needed to be focused on. And I felt deeply blessed that I had the opportunity to know him. And his wife asked me to speak at his funeral, at his life ceremony. And during that ceremony, there was a woman who sang this most amazing opera. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, "Are you a professional opera singer? That was amazing." And she said, "No, it's the first time I've sang in public in 20 years." And I said, "What? What motivated you? What inspired you?" And she said, "Pathways to Successful Living," which I had no idea what that was. But she said, "Talk to Patty, Gary's wife, and she'll tell you about it." And so I went to my wonderful boss's wife and I said, "Marla said I should ask you about Pathways to Successful Living." She gets this big grin on her face and she said, "The Gary Goberville you knew and loved was the way he was because of Pathways." And I didn't know what it was. It was like a personal development seminar. I just trusted that I was going to learn something important in this seminar. So I signed myself up. My husband at the time, we both went. They have a basic program, advanced, and a leadership course. And it was in the leadership course when we did a lot of work on discovering our why, our purpose. And it was, for me, understanding a lot about myself and some of the things that I was experiencing in the workplace that led me to conclude that my purpose was to teach self-acceptance to create a more joyful world.
Mm.
And the lesson around that was in order to do that, you have to be it. And so the journey towards deeper levels of self-acceptance, I think a lot of us are on that journey. I had a long ways to go, but that was the inspiration for my purpose of teaching self-acceptance to create a more joyful world that eventually manifested into the book that Martha Finney, my co-author, and I wrote and published back in 2021. But that has been like a pillar of light for me ever since then because I admired this leader so much. He was such a humble leader and he accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. And then having the experience of going through these seminars was life changing. And yeah, that's where it started.
I love it, and I believe that this is something. It's fascinating. What was his name? You said again, Gary.
Gary Goberville was his name. Yep, he was the head of HR at Kellogg's. I was at the Kellogg company for 12 years. And he came in, I'll never forget it. I was on maternity leave with my second son, and he called me and he said, "Hey, would you be willing to come in for lunch?" I said, sure. So I went in. I had like a combination of 10 different bosses over 10 years, a lot of changes throughout the company. And we sat down for lunch, and I think the second question out of his mouth was, what are your dreams and how do I help you create them? And I nearly fell out of my chair. You know, who is this guy? And he was just a very special leader. He was very special. He was very focused on how do I help other people create the life that they want. And what a great role model to be able to experience that so early in my career.
Beautiful. This is the golden rule of life. Give more than you ever expect to receive, and your life will truly be fulfilled. And it's amazing to be around those types of role models. They are very rare.
Hmm.
And I find that leaders like this allow really the playfulness and the truth to come through because they create a safe space and an
Hmm.
environment that is thriving because they're curious. So my
Hmm.
my biggest I guess my biggest curiosity is like what translated for you by spending time with this gentleman, and how are you applying that, or how have you been applying that into the workplace with your amazing integration, and how you're allowing professional and personal to really come together, because my hallucination is that you have been seeing a gap, and having a role model like that was really opening for you to recognize things that most people may not see.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So I would say that knowing Gary and then learning about his own experiences through the set of seminars that were recommended to me really led me on a journey of healing.
Hmm.
And I think, first of all, he was just, he just was a great person to work with. And he was tough, but he was, like you said, he created a really safe environment for the people that worked for him. And I would say I have been incredibly blessed through my whole career with great mentors like he was, and advisors and thought leaders and guides, and just this amazing set of support team that came together thanks to God, really. I know he brought a lot of amazing people to me. And it was through lots of different influences that shaped me in my career. And, I think that most of us, many of us, according to the research that CDC and Kaiser Permanente have done, indicate that a lot of us grow up in challenging childhoods, dysfunctional childhoods.
Hmm.
And I believe that many of us are unaware, I was for 30 of my 36 years, of how much that past experience shapes everything that we experience at work, how we feel about ourselves, how we interpret other people, how we respond and behave. And it can lead to what I call living the unconscious wounded career path. And so I think, Gary was an early influencer for me and helping me to realize the power of serving others. That was really was his essence, was his ability to do that. And my own experiences going through the corporate world, many times being the only woman on a leadership team, and frankly, most of my career success up until 30 years into it was fueled by my underlying belief that I wasn't good enough, which manifested into perfectionism and people pleasing, believing that everybody else held that power to determine my worth. But just like in the Pathways seminar, learning that my job is to teach self acceptance and be self acceptance, I had to go through a number of different experiences, I think perfectly designed for me by higher power that there is, that were very difficult and painful, especially, having that background of feeling like everybody else got to determine my value and my job was to show up and be as perfect as possible to get it. And so that's been a bit of the journey is, it's sort of like it's like a river that flows. Sometimes it's flowing smoothly and it's going really well, and other times it's not at all. It's rough rapids. But each of those moments are shaping not just me, but anybody who's going through difficult moments in the workplace to be even more aware, more conscious, more capable of managing our own emotional response or managing our own nervous system, which I didn't know how to do. I used alcohol to regulate my nervous system. That's not the greatest way to do it. I'm super grateful that I'm coming up on my 21-year sobriety anniversary. So, yay. Unfortunately, a lot of us, high achieving perfectionists are unaware of how to regulate those emotional responses when things aren't going well at work. And to numb ourselves and to distract ourselves, we turn to all kinds of things that are not good for us. Mine was alcohol. Other people, it could be shopping, gambling, porn, exercise, social media, whatever. And unfortunately, a lot of amazing, talented leaders and people in the world of work are experiencing a lot of these painful experiences. One of the guests that you had on one of your previous podcasts, Shri Preetaji, talked about the fact that there are two states, either suffering or not suffering. And that resonated so strongly for me just on my own journey, but also thinking about the number of people that I've had the privilege of working with and knowing in the workplace, how often suffering shows up. I was calling it a sort of a spiral into a painful pit of emotional responses, anxiety, stress, fear, worry, rumination, all those things that distract us from our greatness and our own self-acceptance.
Mm. Beautifully well articulated, because I find that most people, they really hide, especially at work. And again, I love how you speak from experience. Again, it's so easy to speak when we speak from experience.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And for me, this was the biggest distinction too, is like I remember being in university, feeling so inspired, empowered by my professors and my teachers, and creating magic for the student body. And then I went into an organization and I felt completely disempowered.
Right.
And I left like after 3 months, because I was like, I don't care how long I'm going to be in school. I don't care how long I'm, it doesn't matter to me. This is my life. If I'm not happy, then nobody's happy.
Right.
Because I don't hide it very well. So so I think that a lot of people are maybe hiding their own emotion. And I remember being so curious as I was growing up, like, what is this? Why do I feel like, what is this feeling? Why is this something so important to me? Because this was something that was not taught. So why is this important to us as organizational leaders, or business leaders, to really emphasize the importance of this in the culture within organizations, communities, and development?
Well, this we could probably spend a whole hour talking about this one topic. What I immediately think about was your comment about so many people hiding in the workplace. And I agree with you. In fact, as I started to pay attention to the patterns that I was seeing in the workplace, it became very evident that people are showing up in such an unconscious state, unaware of how much their childhood past is affecting them at work, that they're doing fight, flight, freeze behavior. And so you talked about the freeze, the hiding, and I absolutely agree and know people that are working in the world of work today who are doing everything they can to stay off the radar. They're hiding. I worked with one person years ago who told me one day that she had never spoken first until spoken to for 30 years of her career.
Mm.
So talk about hiding. So people are literally physically, emotionally hiding. They're also um, oftentimes in bully, the fight mode, or fight, flight, freeze. People leaving companies because they don't like it. They just leave. They fly away, or they become bullies. And every company that I've worked in has that personality: the aggressive, argumentative, difficult leader who creates lots of great results and value, but leaves misery in the wake with the people. And so the fight, flight, freeze, and then of course they've added on fawn, which is people pleasing. So
Yeah.
people are hiding through a lot of different methods. We use different protection strategies to create a sense of safety and predictability. Mine was pleasing, perfectionism. Other people use bullying as their strategy to keep people away so that they can't get hurt. And to your point, people freeze or hide and stay as much as they can off the radar. And none of those states are as productive as they could be from a company standpoint. So companies are in the business of high performance. They want the most performance possible for customers, shareholders, stakeholders, whoever that might be. And when people are coming from these places that are really, remnants of our past dysfunctional relationships where we had to figure out a way to create that sense of safety, it's creating a drag on the organization's capability to be successful. And so another way people hide is, a lot of people talk about the imposter syndrome. And so they're hiding their true self. They're not speaking up and saying what they really think. They aren't willing to speak the truth or use candor in stating things that may be unpopular because of their own fear that their livelihood could be threatened. And so there's this sort of premium that you have to be a certain way. I think there's a misbelief, if that's, I don't know if that's a word or not, but where people think they have to be a certain way, so they hide who they truly are. And that is taking a lot of discretionary energy and focusing it in ways that aren't actually creating effectiveness for the organization or for the person who's experiencing that as they're going through their career.
I love this discretionary energy. It's like and this fawning, right? So pleasing, so really holding back. Uh and
Right.
I'm curious through your experience, how many, or you've had decades of experience.
Mhm.
How are you breaking through, or how were you breaking through people that were really holding on to these stories of their past or this discretion, and not really stepping into their voice? Because I find, from my experience, that it's a huge situation in organizations,
Mhm.
and it's important for that level of encouragement. And I also find that the biggest chokehold is the psychology of their leaders. So oftentimes, unless the executive team or the CEO actually thinks in this capacity of opening up themselves, they don't have the capacity to encourage others to be heard, seen, and appreciated from this perspective. So how did you kind of manage that HR perspective from
Yeah.
the team and then also the executives together?
Well, the first thing I would say, you said something really important that I want to highlight, is a concept that comes from a company called Sen Delaney. They've done ton of culture work as well. And it's called the shadow of the leader. And that
Mm,
whatever the leader is doing or not doing, he or she casts a shadow into their organization and people will emulate the boss's behaviors. And so if you have a leader who is extremely intense, then intensity is going to be the shadow that gets cast.
mm,
Excuse me. If you have a leader who is afraid of making decisions, you're going to have an organization that has a hard time making decisions. And I think it's a really powerful concept because, it helped me understand in working within my role as HR leader and also working with leaders how their shadow is affecting the performance of the organization that they're responsible for. And I felt like my role was to share observations and feedback in a very non-judgmental way about things that maybe are affecting what this leader most wants. A lot of times leaders unconscious to how much this shadow is actually, depending on how big your organization is, creating a lot of issues. And so I agree with you completely that the leader, him or herself, I believe self-awareness is such a critical requirement for leaders because so many of us, me included, are in complete states of unconsciousness about how much our patterns and behaviors every day are often accelerated responses based on what happened to us when we were little. And so as leaders become more self-aware about their patterns, their behaviors, their beliefs, and start to take responsibility for managing those more effectively, that shifts cultures, that shifts organization performance. When leaders stay in a state of, dismissing or denying that they have some of these areas that need to be worked on, that potentially becomes a problem for the company, for the organization that that leader is working for. So part of my role, of course, was working with my boss, whether it was a CEO or a vice president running a big business, was to share perspective about the impact of certain leadership behavior and leadership shadows that were happening in the organization, and how that could actually undermine what my boss most wanted to create. And so that was a lot of what I did and I still do in the work that I do with my little consulting practice, is really helping people become more aware of their unconscious patterns and beliefs that are getting in their way, that often lead to people feeling frightened, afraid, worried about their capability. That imposter syndrome comes up a lot. And as you start to help them shift to see, a lot of that's fueled from your past. The research that I referenced earlier suggests that nearly 2/3 of us experience at least one significant adverse childhood event before the age of 18. And these are significant things: abuse, neglect, violence in the home, addiction in the home, et cetera. It's 10 really significant things. 67% of us experience at least one, 40% experience two. And then there's a small group, 13% of us, that experience more than four. That includes me. And so, our past is guiding how we behave, often like coming in. It feels like sometimes a lot of teenagers showing up at work that are taking on the task of adults, but are actually stuck in some of those unconscious states. So you ask great questions. I love the questions. I hope I'm not rambling too much, but I think that partnership with leaders, um, sometimes, having difficult conversations with my boss, saying, this is a leader that's probably hurting what you most want to create because of their inability to take responsibility for their actions, their aggressive nature, some element of their temperament that's impairing their effectiveness. If there's a pattern, frequency, and intensity of that behavior, over time it becomes a situation where the organization has to decide, is this person stay or go? And, obviously in 36 years, I was involved in a lot of those discussions.
And how did you face challenges like this when, because I imagine, again, like you said, there's a lot of challenges that over 36 years were something that have been cultivated or engaged in. And, one of the things that I love, the more conscious we become, is the more certain we actually become of our light and shadow side, really working in that space of harmony.
Yes.
And what I've learned is the more healthier we become within our experience in terms of owning the value that we bring to the table, we're okay to walk into the challenges or the darkness, and we're okay to walk into the light and shine. Whichever way we just get shit done. And so what kind of opportunities, challenges they could be considered to some, but to me, I like to see them as opportunities
I do too.
to create growth for everybody, including ourselves. What are some of these specifics that maybe you could share or emphasize that are important that helped you grow, but also
Mhm.
were very important for the organization to really let go of that threshold of control, to really expand their own awareness as a culture, as an organization, as leaders?
Yeah, I have a lot of those examples. I uh, I had a lot to learn on my journey. When you give away all your power to other people to decide your worth and value, you put yourself in a precarious position. And I see this behavior and pattern all the time in the workplace where, people want the validation of their boss. They want the acceptance of their peers. All this energy is being spent to feel to not feel rejection. Whatever the need is that a person has to feel that they matter, that they're important, that they have a place in this team. And so, an early challenge. Oh my goodness, I would get so triggered by different people and bosses if they looked at me wrong. But some big ones. I remember I was in one of my first big HR vice president roles, and the team was wildly successful from a business performance standpoint. They were running the biggest business in the company, multi-billion-dollar business, and I wanted so desperately to be accepted by this group of leaders. And I knew that they weren't particularly excited about HR, as some leaders aren't. And the woman who was in the job before me left sort of abruptly. Nobody ever really knew what happened, but she left pretty early into her tenure with that group. And then I joined, and I was trying so hard to prove myself. That was such a core component of my daily orientation is I have to prove myself to these guys so that they'll accept me. And what I didn't realize was that in my need to prove myself, or my belief that I had to prove myself, it actually was pushing them further and further away. And over time, I sort of became sport. They were not very nice to me. you know, One of the leaders, I would be in the office early in the morning, tapping on my computer because I like to get in early. We had a large manufacturing workforce. And he would, just for sport, come down and slam his fist on the window as loudly as he could to startle me. And then he'd laugh and walk away. And, just a really difficult, for me, it was very difficult to have these experiences where I felt like I really wasn't part of this group. And I was very lucky. I had an amazing coach at the time, and she had me do an exercise, which I have shared with many leaders over the time as well, because it's so powerful. And the exercise was to imagine, first of all, she said, pick the worst of the group. There were nine leaders, and she said, pick the worst. And I said, okay, there's four of them. And she said, all right, I want you to imagine that you are in their eyes looking at you. And if they were to describe you in the symbolic form of an animal, what animal would they pick for you? And I just burst out laughing. I'm like, oh my God, I'm a golden retriever puppy dog. I just want them to
Mhm.
pat me on the head, tell me what a good girl I am, and basically love me. It's just this deep need to be accepted. And then she said, all right, get back into your own eyes. And then I want you to look at each of those four men and tell me what animals would you say represent them? And there was a grizzly bear, a gorilla, a wolf with long fangs, and a hyena, laughing, but I always felt like he was circling me, ready to go in for the kill. And this was really a major shift for me because this coach, Tony Chinoy was her name, or still is her name, really helped me realize that I was giving away all my power. I was coming out in a way that was very needy, clingy. I wanted them to tell me I was okay. And as a result, it was fueling their response to me. And I realized with her support that I could not continue in this state. That puppy dog is a part of my personality. I like people to be pleased with my work. I like to do great work, but it was energy sucking that constantly going into work every day and feeling like that hamster on the wheel, constantly trying to prove myself. And it seemed to get worse and worse in my relationship with these men. And it also helped me realize that I was really putting myself in a victim role by giving everybody else the right to determine my worth and value, to accept me. I was giving away all my power and depending on other people that in some cases, some I greatly respected, others I respected less. So why was I doing this? And so part of the work then was to shift from recognizing the puppy is just part of who I am, always will be. And I had to take on a stronger symbolic animal to take on some of these issues more assertively. So being assertive was a big area of opportunity for me. And so I picked the lioness because I see that animal as a very strong, smart, will fight if she needs to, but isn't going out to hunt specifically, or at least to go kill. She's really, I don't know, I just had this image of her as being the strong, powerful, wise animal. And so over time, I started to take that energy into my conversations with these men. And for example, the grizzly bear who slammed his fist on my window just to scare me every morning also never showed up for any meetings I scheduled with him, which felt really disrespectful. And so one day, In my lioness energy, I went into his office unannounced. I sat down in the chair. He was typing on his laptop with his back to me, and he slowly turned. He was a big guy. He slowly turned, and he looked at me. I could almost hear him growling. Like, what are you doing in my office? And I said, I've realized you never show up for any meetings I meet. And I'm just curious, is it A, you're too busy? B, you don't value HR? Or C, you just don't like me? And I just sat there. And I kept thinking, lioness, 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 be strong, be strong. And he sat there for a minute and he looked away. Then he looked back at me and he said, you know what? You're right. I'll never do that again. And from that point on, he never missed a meeting with me. And literally till the day he died, we were friends. So it was a big shift for me taking back my own power that I had unconsciously given away to everybody and taking it back and saying, okay, this was a pivotal, 11 months. I felt like I think I went home every night and cried and drank Chardonnay because they were so, I thought they were so awful. But in fact, they were perfect for me. The whole experience was perfectly designed for me to realize that I was the one that was giving away all the power to everybody else, and that nobody else gets to own that. That's my responsibility. And so, that's a long story of an example, but that was a very early on challenge in my career that was huge in terms of realizing the path that I needed to go on was how do I build more resilience around how I respond to other people when I think that they don't like me or are judging me or rejecting me.
I like it. It's all about ownership, isn't it? And we oftentimes forget that about owning our strength and owning our power and owning our resolve in the ways that we choose to show up. Uh, I love how you decided and committed within yourself to say, hey, I'm not gonna feel sorry for myself.
Yep.
And this is, you talked about fawning and people pleasing and leadership. I think that we first of all need to lead oneself, because
Right. Agree.
otherwise the true
Yep.
leaders will never actually feel like they get to show up because they haven't taken the time or the audacity to lead oneself, and that influence or internal fluid
Hmm.
allows
Hmm.
us to really cultivate a true change in our environments. One of the things that I learned from Tony is, like, if we go into multiple different environments around the world and we can influence those environments with ease and grace and just power,
Hmm.
the environment starts to change based off of what our needs are, not the external circumstances influences who we are. And I
Right.
find that this is so important amongst leaders, that really indicating the importance of taking absolute responsibility. And so it's amazing to hear, because I think that everybody, by the way, is a leader. Everyone is a leader to me, and it's a choice that
Hmm.
needs to be taken consciously, because then all the environment starts to become an expression of our own internal system. And so
Yeah.
I really love that your vulnerability in this, and this authenticity of really sharing how you really broke through yourself, because I think that's really resonant for a lot of people that may feel, oh, it's because of something else or somebody else or some bully or some, versus saying, hey, what can I do better?
Right. Yep. And to your point, that self-awareness and self-regulation is so key to leadership. And like I said, that unconscious state of not even realizing how much, if you are demonstrating behavior that indicate to me that you're rejecting me or judging me, I will have a very strong reaction because I had a dad, my authority figure dad, who, while he did a lot of things really well, and I don't focus on blaming or judging parents at all. I think they have their own lessons to teach us, but he had unpredictable rage. And so I came to believe that my job was to try to manage my environment to avoid his rage because it was really scary. But anytime somebody at work, then many, many years later, would do something that felt judgmental or rejection or whatever, my nervous system would go into high alert. And, like five fire, fire station drill, come and help me out. And then I would react by people pleasing, perfectionism, overworking, workaholism was, that, and it is still majorly prevalent in our companies today. But realizing that I was the one that was creating that response unconsciously because of things that had happened to me when I was younger. The brain's really interesting. I don't, I'm certainly not a brain expert, but I've done a lot of research to know that survival mode of our brain, the fight, flight, freeze, the amygdala, has no memory of time. It has memory of the emotions of survival. And ultimately, we're hoping we can get into our prefrontal cortex, the executive part of our brain, where we can make good decisions and problem solve, et cetera. But when we get emotionally wound up in the workplace, that hook or trigger, however you want to refer to it, we go into this immediate emergency state of fight, flight, or freeze, which is fueled from all those past experiences until we start to recognize that when that happens. So this is what's so unique about the book that Martha and I wrote, is I believe the workplace is a wonderful place for emotional healing, particularly in moments when we're crashing into one another. Because rather than going down that unconscious spiral into those painful emotions, the state of suffering for your previous guest, we can catch ourselves and say, okay, I'm having a really strong reaction to feeling rejected or judged or afraid. I need to take ownership of my response, and I need to process that emotion effectively. And of course, there are lots of different ways to do that. Sound, movement, and breath being the three main modems to do that. You know what I'm talking about. The three ways to process it out of your body is sound, movement, and breath. And until leaders start to take responsibility for their responses and reactions to other from a state of conscious awareness, that's then when they can start to really create great value for the teams that they're working in. So I could not agree with you more about the self-awareness, self-regulation, healthy ways of self-regulating, not the unhealthy ways that so many of us use. And in doing so, as more and more leaders become more and more aware of their responses, they can manage them more effectively. I have a simple 3-step process I teach people to manage those moments when you get emotionally like, whoa, I'm really upset, I'm afraid, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm scared, whatever it is, that's the moment to practice new ways of responding and change those neural networks in your brain.
This actually, I think this is such an important component of business, and this emotional intelligence of how we choose to really negotiation, sales, agreements, things like this. Whenever, there's a challenge in an agreement or something is, really not serving the way that we had expected it. I find that even it may be an agreement and it may be signed, maybe even sealed, there's always a way to communicate where the separation fell short. And I think that this allows people to take a lot more responsibility of saying, hey, just because something is written down on paper, this is what changed, and this is where we need to adapt, and this is where the flexibility. And I think that sometimes my hallucination is
Mhm.
that it's important for us to say, hey, where's the true consciousness in this conversation? Where's the true consciousness in this change of environment? Where's the true consciousness in what's best for all parties involved? And
Mhm.
it brings out the ability to not be so like black and white, and discover that there's a lot of colors in between in business, because I think that this changes the nature and then truly allows people to come from a place of understanding, not just from a place of, hey, this is the way it is and that's it. And I think that that's more of a dominant old paradigm perspective, and really evolving to that next stage of principles where we're really focusing on evolutionary standards of paying attention to the needs of all parties involved. From
Right.
that place, it allows us to cultivate a way more empowering atmosphere, meaning, and negotiation that allows more people to grow as a result of coming to some sort of an agreement that's needs to be evolved from my perspective.
Yeah, no, I think you said a couple of things that I want to highlight. One, I think it is really important for leaders to acknowledge and to take ownership. And I'm really curious from your own experience too, if you could share, how do you go about doing that? Because I could not agree more with your comment about the fact that leaders need to be aware, they need to be conscious leaders, so many are not. Yeah. I mean, I'm on a mission to help educate or make people more conscious to that with my keynote and all the things I do around my book. Yay, as a core pillar of my executive coaching as well, is helping people understand some of their unconscious patterns and beliefs that are getting in their way of doing exactly what you just said. It's almost like sometimes, so many of us, me included, have a bag over our head and are completely unaware of how much we are acting in ways that are coming from unconscious reactions that often fueled and molded from when we were really little.
I find that it's actually a scarce mentality. So there's an intergenerational experience that comes from lack or not enough.
Hmm.
And my biggest discovery is that we're already enough, just the fact that we're here. So it's owning the value of the fact that we're present, we're
Hmm.
intelligent, meaning intelligence that we see things as they are, not worse than they are. That
Mm.
we can choose to see them better and then make them so, take responsibility. And
Hmm.
from that intelligence, we get to actually, and it's not about, like, Tony says, it's not about positivity. It's about actually choosing to walk through the path and say, hey,
Hmm.
what's the challenge here? What's the real challenge here? Because I can hear everything that's going on the above, but what's the actual pattern here? And one
Right.
of the things that I've discovered is that if people are not willing to have the conversation, there's something else going on. Most times, people want to communicate with email or with text or with voice notes, but they struggle in this type of interaction.
Hmm.
And so this is where the true power comes, is the reverence of really connecting with each other, because it's the power is in the presence. And I believe that leaders from this state, this empowering state, beautiful state, they can figure out anything because creativity comes through us. It's something that allows us to really indicate what's the problem. And a leader's job is not to not have problems, it's to solve them.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what the conscious leader really would do is like, I don't need to know all of the answers, but I have to be willing to stand tall in front of the challenge and be willing to say, hey, let's figure this out together. That to me is a great leader.
I completely agree. And I think the challenge that many companies have is that so many leaders are coming from a place of distraction and, worried about their own survival. And so show up in those ways we talked about earlier, the fight, flight, freeze, and please modes that are not only hurting them, but hurting the company. And, so I think the challenge that we face is leaders working with organizations, and I know you do a ton of work in the culture area as well, is how do you shift leaders from that unconscious state to the conscious state so that they can do exactly what you were just describing, creating that kind of environment where people thrive, rather than people being distracted with their own fears and worries. That's what, that's what I saw so much and still see in my consulting work, is how much energy is being consumed, sort of how many calories do we consume worrying, fretting, in a state of anxiety, fear, not, limiting beliefs, sort of driving the bus. I'm not good enough. I can't do anything right. They're going to find out I really don't know what I'm doing. The limiting beliefs go on and on and on. And so that to me is the area of opportunity, is how do you help leaders break free of that unconscious state? That was one of the reasons why I wrote the book, was I realized that I had a responsibility to help wake people up at work, that they don't have to continue in this unconscious state, working ridiculous hours all the time, day in and day out, weekend in and weekend out, that they don't have to give away their power to other people to determine their worth and value, that they don't have to spend their evenings worried about work and worried about what they're doing at work, and as a result, taking away all that energy from their family. That's what I did. I can't go back to those days when my kids were growing up, but I was either at work, worrying about work, at home, having anxiety about work, and feeling like I should be doing more. And as a result, I neglected my own kids when they were growing up. And so that opportunity is, and I hope this is so powerful to have this opportunity to speak with you on your podcast, is that until people wake up to how much their unconscious past is guiding them and driving them and putting them in a position where they're giving away all their power to everybody else to determine their worth and value, we will continue to have broken families. I think as people start to heal and become aware and take accountability for how they're showing up, how the past is influencing that, and start to do work to create a different outcome, both for themselves, their company, as well as their family system.
I love that you really have taken the time to write this book. I'm really excited. If I would love for you to share actually a little bit deeper about, the book and, how it's been, why it's been so important to you, because this is something that uh, I know that I can just imagine. I'm wanting to write a book myself, except, I just have so many things happening. So I know how much of devotion and dedication it does to taking. Tell us about the book, where people can find it, a little bit more about, the meaning that you gave it and your big why behind it.
I love it. So first of all, I'll show you a picture. It's got two bumper cars on the cover. And the reason why it has two bumper cars is Martha and I talk about workplace conflict when we crash into somebody and we have that strong emotional response. We call it a bumper car moment. And often, like I've said a couple times, that bumper car moment and our response, how our nervous system is responding, is directly related to our dysfunctional childhood. And so the book was truly a journey. So I started writing the book in 2004. And I didn't really have a clear vision for the book, but I just sort of kept writing stories. Um, and one of them was about the night my sister died, which is a fairly traumatic story to share. But the essence was the journey was realizing that the most difficult moments in my life and at work were actually the biggest gifts to me on my own soul journey. And as I started to work with Martha, so I wrote my first manuscript, finished it in 2017. So 13 years of writing a manuscript. It was written over many years. I had sort of a vision, but it wasn't really clear. And so it needed a lot of work. And then I was very blessed that Martha Finney, who I'd written a chapter for a book for her for HR years ago, we didn't really know each other that well, reached out and said, hey, she said I was looking at her LinkedIn. I don't remember doing that, but we reconnected. She asked, what are you doing? And I said, well, I just wrote this book. I don't know what to do with it. Well, Martha's published 30 plus books. And she said, well, I want you to send me your manuscript. And so I sent it to her. The next morning, she wrote me a note really early in the morning. She was at that time living in Santa Fe. She'd get up at 3 in the morning. And the note basically said, I've spent the last 3 months in self-seclusion at an Airbnb in Florida, processing my dysfunctional childhood. And I feel like God has been preparing me to work with you. And every time I say that, I get chills because this book would not be what it is without Martha Finney. And then we spent another 2.5 years working on the research, the neuroplasticity research, understanding that we can change and rewire how our brains think about ourselves. We can soften the voice of the limiting beliefs that seem to distract us a lot. And we also did a ton of work looking at the impact of positive psychology and how we could bring that in. So we finished the book in, it was early 2021. And I said to Martha, I'm not publishing it. I like had a total meltdown. No, I'm going to be judged personally. Family members aren't going to be happy about my speaking the truth. My employer may say, oh my gosh, we didn't know this about you. We don't think you should work for us. I mean, I had so much fear. And luckily, Martha found a woman named Celine DaCosta, and she was offering a one-on-one special called a Story Clarity Intensive. And I didn't even know what that was. But I engaged Celine to work with me for 90 minutes. And in that session, she helped me figure out that my purpose for writing this book, my why, which was to wake people up from their unconscious relationship with the past and how that's affecting them at work. My why was way bigger than my fear. And as soon as she helped me realize that, it was like everything just sort of softened. We wrote the book. Jack Canfield, who is the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, read my book and said it's in his top 5 most favorite books because it's so important, so critical, and so core. And from that point on, it was just, okay, here we go. And what we basically teach is how to use the workplace as a laboratory for emotional healing, because we're always crashing into people that are triggering our emotional responses, that are launching us into this unconscious wounded career path. And we teach people how to go from that path to step onto the conscious healing career path, where we become aware of why we're responding and over responding to things at work and people at work because of things that happened to us when we were little. And how to take those bumper car moments, those crashes when we, like sometimes you really feel like you've been in a car crash because it's so emotionally upsetting, how to use those moments as a healing opportunity and becoming more conscious of why your response is so big, and then taking 3 simple steps. First, the first step is creating choice, which is processing that emotion so you have a choice. The second step is elevating your action, getting into that executive part of the brain that problem solves. And then the third step is, once you've done something differently than how you've done it before, is to take time to really celebrate it, and to celebrate it as an act of integrating it into your identity. And so the book, I'm very proud of the book. It was a long journey to get to where it is now, but it has been a privilege to be able to write it and share it with people and have it help people in their own lives realize how much of their unconscious reactions and responses and beliefs about themselves actually can be healed.
There is magic in so much of what you're saying, and this wisdom is like what comes to me is the conscious person or leader will use the world as a mirror and take responsibility of their actions. The unconscious person or leader will attack the mirror because it doesn't know it's a mirror.
Right. You're exactly right. Yep. And, I take full responsibility and accountability that I was unconscious to my past influences for 30 of my 36 years. And what a difference it is to experience the workplace coming from that place of leadership that you talked about. And now,
Susan, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead. My
I was just
apologies.
saying, now having the privilege to share that through whether it's executive coaching or consulting, helping people and organizations to break through some of these unconscious patterns that get in the way of joy and self-acceptance.
And how could people find you? What's the best way to connect with you, reach out to you, learn more about you and the book?
Yeah, first, the book's available on Amazon. It's easy. Healing at Work. Susan, I think Schmidt is in the name of Schmidt's a middle name, SCHMITT, Winchester. And then to get a hold of me or to learn more about me, it's susanwinchester.com. Super easy. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for this time, this energy, this presence, this wisdom. I have one final question before you go.
Mhm.
If you had 3 days left to live, what would you do?
I love it. Well, I just finished reading The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. And in it, he says, every day you should ask yourself, what would I do today if it was my last day? And so what I would do in the next 3 days is I would continue doing what I've been focused on doing, which is how do I create joy in everything that I do? And that includes spending time with my husband and sons. I would spend time with my animals, my dogs, my horses. I would be out in nature. And I would be celebrating all the gifts that I've been given during this life. And that's what I would be doing, is finding ways to create joy and even more joy in my life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and you're doing great work in the world as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Big love, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yep, you too. Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for listening to the Resilient Minds. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please make sure to go comment and like and follow us on iTunes or Spotify, and make sure, please make sure that if you really love this, to share this episode, and make sure that you're inviting all your friends to like it as we continue to unfold what the beauty of our minds does, more importantly, how powerful our heart level of intelligence can be when we combine our heart and our brain together. And more importantly, make sure you take the time to take a look at what we're doing at Balanced Media Ventures and how we can actually really support you in doubling your impact, your income, and your influence, and how you can bring your life's greatest vision into your purpose and create it from that level of reality. Talk to you soon.